For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Welcome to Revival and Reformation with Bishop Abraham OLALEYE.
Welcome one more time to your favorite program, Revival and Reformation. Reformation is restoring truth, restoration of truth. What God intended from the very beginning is that at some point, God will unveil His Son, will reveal the truth to us. But before this time, God came to man through many ways, through many methods. He spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in the last day, He has spoken to us by His Son. And Jesus is the Son of God, and He is the truth. In John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So I'm talking about a person, the personality of Jesus as the truth presented to man from God. To know Him, to embrace Him, and cling to Him, and then there is assurance of life after death. That is assurance of salvation and resurrection at the last day. This truth is also called the Word, the eternal Word, the Word that existed from God, or with God from the very beginning. Before the world was founded, the Son was with His Father as a co-worker. Remember, in the creation, God said, come and let us create man in our image and after our likeness. So interesting to know. And this is the 5th week since the series began, representing the message of salvation, because it has become so crucial, so pertinent, that this message of eternal life through God's Holy Son must be understood. This generation, like the generation that were born in the wilderness when the children of Israel were in Exodus, must be circumcised, that the mark of God's divine ownership must be on their foreskin. And this is very interesting. We have looked at so many subjects under this area. Salvation is by grace through faith. It is not of good works, and all the things that God has done to cut men, to bring men to the knowledge of the truth. Today we are looking at a very crucial pillars, and there are 5 of them. I call them the 5 pillars of salvation. By these pillars, everyone who believes and accepts each of these 5 pillars can beat their chest in confidence by the grace and mercy of God that they are saved. Has it ever occurred to you before, or has it ever come to your heart at any time, asking yourself the question, am I really saved? Am I really born again? Am I sure that my name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life? Oh, I did something that I ought not to do. I did something wrong. Is God upset with me? Is my name out of the Book of Life? Now, from these 5 pillars, you will see the work of God that was wrought in the body of His Son, and that will put your heart at rest, confident that your salvation is not a function of your good work, but of the prerogative of His mercy. And this is very exciting to me. Now, 5 pillars of salvation. And what are the 5 pillars? Number 1, the passion of Christ. The word passion here is the word suffering. And that's why you hear about the passion or the passion of Christ. Passion is defined as the suffering of Jesus at crucifixion. Now, this definition is not just a Bible definition, so to say, because Jesus is mentioned. I'm talking about the normal standard English dictionary defines passion as the suffering of Jesus at crucifixion. It is also the agony and the excruciating pain that the Son of God went through. So that means what he suffered in crucifixion was an agony. He went through agony. He went through pain. And like I said in a book I wrote on this subject, Mel Gibson, who did the Passion of the Christ, actually did so well. That was an excellent, work to depict, to show what the Christ, the Messiah, suffered to earn salvation for men. But like I said, good as his work is, it can never be the same because he just acted it. But we are talking about somebody who went through it, because the hands of Mel Gibson were not nailed, okay? A crown, a real crown was not pushed to his head, okay? And he did not drink any vinegar. So it was acted. So now you felt so touched that Mel Gibson went through such pain just watching what was acted. Now imagine the one who actually suffered the pain, the agony, the torture. Okay. Now this passion, which is this suffering, began at the Garden of Gethsemane when he was praying. There are people who have visited that location before, and that was where he was arrested, really. When Judas brought a team of law enforcement officers to arrest Jesus. This was where Jesus prayed and said, Father, if it is your will, let this cup pass, over me. And immediately checked himself and said, no, Lord, not as I will, but your will must be done, because I know you have sent me for this purpose. You have prepared my body for this ultimate sacrifice that I'm about to go through, so that I may earn redemption, salvation for the human race. So the Gethsemane experience was so excruciating that the Gospel of Luke tells us that the sweat that came from Jesus' body was like great drops of blood. Now, when we sweat out water, But when Jesus sweated, according to this experience, he sweated blood, okay? He fought sin to the point that he shed blood. And when he said, Lord, if this can pass from me, and immediately said, but not my will, but your will be done, Luke also tells us that angels came down to strengthen him. They didn't come to deliver him from the experience. They didn't say to him, oh, we have been sent from the Father to cut it off. No, you can't go through this any longer. They only strengthened him so that he could continue the process. So you understand what we are talking about, the pillars of salvation and the suffering, the passion being the first of it. Now, when the condemnation was on, he was arrested and taken to the court, which Pilate presided over, okay, the Roman governor at that time, okay. Now he was condemned. Pilate would have hesitated because he didn't find anything worthy of death, but the people insisted that Jesus must be crucified. Even when a robber, a notorious criminal, was offered in the state, they said no, they should let the criminal go free, but Jesus must be crucified. Okay. Now, the moment the judgment was passed, and Pilate was made to do what he knew should not be done, the agony began, or continued, so to say, because it started already from the Garden of Gethsemane. And what was next? The 39 stripes on the back of the Messiah. Okay. He was whipped with 39 strokes of cane. But guess what? In Isaiah, almost 750 plus BC, before Christ, had given a prophecy in chapter 53, 4 and 5. He said, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. Verse 5. But he was wounded, and Jesus was actually wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace. Now, I want to pay attention to this. What brought your peace? What brought my tranquil state of mind, this rest and confident assurance in the work of the cross, was done by the stripes. What brought my healing? What brought your healing? That you fall into sickness, different infirmities, and you pray to God for healing and you are healed, was purchased by the stripes at his back. He said he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. Can you imagine that Isaiah already prophesied this 750 years thereabout before the Messiah came? So this is very interesting. Now, when he was going to Golgotha, where he would be crucified, he also went through some suffering. He was made to carry his wooden cross. And this cross was very heavy. Wooden cross, not a light wood, a very heavy wood. Wood that is heavy enough to take the weight of the Savior and to keep him. The cross that were used for crucifying people were not just weak woods, but they were strong ones, okay? So they were convinced that Jesus was a criminal because of what the Jewish authorities have done to him, okay? So they had to nail him, but before then, he had to carry his cross, okay? Now, when he was carrying his cross, he was falling. And there are what we call in Israel the many stations of the cross. Why Jesus carried the cross, stopped at one point or the other because he was worn out, he was fatigued because of the stripes that he had received. Okay. And then one Simon, an African, was commandeered to come and help him carry the cross when it was obvious that he could not carry the cross for all the pains that he had gone through. Okay. He was meant to carry his wooden cross to Golgotha and fell many times. So, number one, remember the passion, the suffering, the crucifixion, the agony, the excruciation of the Christ. Your faith must be in this suffering. You must believe that he suffered on the cross. You shouldn't believe what some religions say, that the Father could not stand his Son suffering with such agony, therefore he brought an angel to replace him on the cross. No. The sacrifices and crucifixion of an angel will not remedy the sins of the world. It has to be the sacrifices and the crucifixion of God's holy Son, whose DNA is the holy DNA that could take away the sins of the whole world. Okay, that is the passion. Beginning from Gethsemane, where he prayed in great agony, the 39 stripes on his back, he was made to carry his wooden cross. He fell many times before somebody was commanded to come and help him carry the cross. These sins make up the suffering. You have to believe that he suffered. Okay. And before I go to the next thing, it also shows that we as Christians must also suffer. I know that's like a strange doctrine. Philippians, I guess, said that I may know him and the power of his resurrection. That should be Philippians 3:10, if I'm correct. That I may know him in the power of his resurrection, because everybody wants to know him in the power of his resurrection. Very great power, healing the sick, casting out the devil. But he also says, and in the fellowship of his suffering. So that is when suffering becomes a communion, a fellowship. So sometimes in our lives as Christians, we are called to go through challenges of life, which is not because Satan is having an upper hand, no, but because we must identify with him. There are times that things will not go well. There are times the finances are not forthcoming as it comes for others who are, taking a shortcut and trying to find a way, who cannot trust God, who cannot wait upon God. Sometimes it can come through sickness. In different ways, we suffer with him so that we may also reign with him, as the Bible says, so that we may also manifest the power of his resurrection. Now, the next thing that happened, of course, as you will know, is the crucifixion. That is the second pillar of salvation. You have believed in the suffering. Now you must believe in the crucifixion. You must believe that he was not just taken, when he was condemned in the court, he was not just driven to the cross in a black Maria and then nailed to the cross. No, he went through those agonies and sufferings. It began at that point. Can you see the systematic way, the gradual process by which he went through all this? Okay, so there was a build-up. It started from the suffering and now comes to the second part, which is the crucifixion. And what is crucifixion? Because many words can be taken for granted when their meaning is not known. Crucifixion is an act of executing a criminal by a method widespread in the ancient world, where the victim's hands and feet are bound or nailed to a cross. You know that the cross is made of a vertical and horizontal wood. It was a capital punishment. And it has its history dating back to Deuteronomy in the land where the children of Israel were about to enter Canaan. It is the infliction of extremely painful punishment, suffering, or torturing. That's interesting. It is the infliction of extremely painful punishment, suffering, or torturing. It's like killing somebody. It could have been shot. It could have been drowned in water. It could have been pushed off from a moving vehicle or something, and he would die immediately. But they made him die gradually. Not by terminal sickness, but all happened in a day. You can imagine the torture. You know that death is coming, and it didn't just come at once so that we can just forget all about it, but it came step by step in a day, step by step. And this is very torturous, very, very torturous. Now, this crucifixion was necessary to free men from the curse of the law, because in Deuteronomy 21, God had given an instruction to Moses that anyone who commits a sin worthy of death, there are so many other sins that will not bring, the penalty of death. But when a man committed a sin that was worthy of death, then that is the highest penalty you can talk about. So the person had to die on a wooden cross to take evil out of the land. That evil person, that criminal person must not be allowed to stay, to live, because it will bring evil upon the land. Okay, now you can imagine what Jesus did, the price he had paid. That is number one. Number two, the moment he dies on the cross, he is brought down from the cross to be buried same day, because even that body of the criminal must not be allowed on the ground overnight. That body must be quickly taken away so that the curse of the law does not come on that ground and in that nation. Now here the link. Galatians 3:13 now says we have been redeemed from that curse of the law, that curse that was placed on anyone who hangs on the tree. Because in that Deuteronomy it is said, cursed is any man who has committed such an offense that warranted his being crucified on the cross. So curse is that person. So Galatians 3:13 say, now because of what Christ has done on the same cross, we are being redeemed from the curse of the law. Why? He was made a curse for us, as it is written, curse is everyone that hangs on the tree. So this is the deep mystery. Now, this is very good for me. Now, the crown of thorns. What about the crown of thorns? Still under crucifixion, thorns were gotten from anywhere, twisted into a crown form and put on his head and pressed on his head so that the thorn will bruise everywhere that the thorn was pressed through. So guess what is happening there? Blood will be coming. Remember 39 strokes of cane at the back, blood will be coming. Now, we talk about the 6 inches nail that pierced his hand, blood was coming. The same 6 nails at his feet, blood was coming. Then a spear was thrust to his side, because the Bible said they would look unto him who was pierced. So blood was coming. Now, can you imagine the measure of blood that came from, the pints of blood that came from the Lord's body, and nobody will lose that amount of blood and still be alive? Now, obviously, very, very impossible. It's not possible for that person to still be alive. So, but this method of death is the one that can bring God's redemption, is the one that can bring God's salvation. So God the Father was not ready to negotiate how his son was to die. It must go according to the script. It's not as if that God laid down a script from heaven and said, this is the way I want my son to die. But it's going to play out in the hands of the criminals who crucified him, the Roman soldiers and the Jewish people that condemned him to death, okay? And they will not know that everything that was applied, every punishment that was applied, had specific role to play in the life of those who come to him for salvation. The healing for their body by the stripes, okay? The head, with crown of thorns, that will now wear the crown of gold and will be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Okay, the suffering in Gethsemane, where nothing was negotiated, nothing was changed, so that our sin may be fully atoned for. And finally, the crucifixion, which will result in the next point. So the crucifixion was necessary to free men from the curse of the law. Okay. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, like I read 3:13 Galatians, having become a curse for us, for it's written, curse is everyone who hangs on a tree. So, what also happened there when he was nailed to the cross? The old man was crucified. So you are asking me, who is the old man here? You and I, who were in the body of flesh. And the body of flesh was the body of sin, was the station for sin. It was the abattoir where animals were slaughtered. It was the prison house where sinners were condemned. It was death house where the condemned people were killed. But you know the difference? Jesus did not commit any sin to be there. Romans 6:6a says, knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him. Our old man was crucified with Christ. And that is very deep. So that means when Christ died, we died. His body of sin was killed. His body of sin died. But guess what? His body of sin, the sin that he did not commit, it wasn't him that committed the sin. It was us, you and I, that committed the sin that was laid on Jesus' body. And it was what was laid on his body that necessitated his death. There would be no point for him to die if he had no body of sin. So he had a body of sin, which he did not commit, which was not his sin, but our sin. Knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him. So now, the third thing, because I have to finish this here, and then next week can continue with the rest, is his death. After all the agonies and pain, Jesus said, "It is finished," and died. I said that before. What finished? The assignment that brought him to the world. Completed, done deal, paid, satisfied. Okay. Now hear this. In Ezekiel, God had said to the prophet, "The soul that sins will die." In other words, it is the soul that has sinned that will die, and not the soul that has not sinned. Now, our souls have sinned, so we are to die. But then a Redeemer comes, a priest, a high priest comes, who stood between us, sinful men, and a holy God, and said, "Hey, Father, they are guilty of sin, but I chose to lay their sins and iniquity on me so that I will die in their place." Just like in the Old Testament, when the high priest went into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, they brought a ram, and the priest will slap the head of the ram to input all his iniquities and unrighteousness in the lamb, and then the lamb will be killed. And this was just pointing to Jesus. And I said last week, if there was one thing that the sacrifices of the Old Testament achieved, it just that he pointed to the ultimate sacrifice in the high priest of God. So as hands were laid on the animal to impart the sins, and he put the sins of men on them, to justify their killing of the animals, so Jesus was slapped with the sins of men so that he could now die in their place. So he says in 2 Corinthians 5:21, "For he made him who knew no sin to be sin." Not to be a sinner, because he couldn't be a sinner, but to make him to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. He made him who knew no sin. He committed no sin. So when he died carrying sins, it was not his sin that he carried, it was ours that he carried. So as a high priest, he stood in our place. And this is what we call what human efforts could not achieve. In Micah 6, from verse 6, he said, "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old?" Can you see him saying something similar to the Old Testament and the sacrifices? Even in the Old Testament, this prophet lived and was prophesying this great thing. Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, 10,000 rivers of oil? Will he be satisfied with the lamb and the rams that Solomon offered at the dedication of the temple, which is now our body? He said, "Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?" And of course, now for man, this is impossible. You can't give your son. But for God, he gave his firstborn for the transgression, the very fruit of his body, for the souls of men. Here we go. Of 5, we have looked at 3. Number 1, the suffering, the passion. Number 2, the crucifixion. Number 3, the death. Okay, that gave God satisfaction. You must believe that he suffered in the flesh. You must believe that he was crucified in his flesh, nailed to the cross, and died there. You must believe that the body of sin was buried. And then salvation is knocking your door. Next week, when I come with the 2 other pillars, then salvation has entered. Then you know that you know that you know beyond a shadow of doubt that you are saved. Now, what are we doing? We are trying to recalibrate this salvation message so we can start all over afresh, so that the generation that did not know the works of God may know what God accomplished through his son Jesus. That all the works done in the Old Testament through the prophets were only pointers to the ultimate sacrifice on the cross, and Jesus has paid it all. May the Lord bless and keep your soul and spirit together, and cause you to continue to understand as these efforts are geared towards giving you understanding and revelation about what Christ has suffered, so that you do not follow another way, which is no way, but following Jesus. I want to encourage you to share. You know, watch on your Facebook, watch on your YouTube, and make your comments. If there's any question you like to ask, feel free to do so, and the Lord will bless you in a very special way. Until I come back next week to finish the other parts of the pillars of salvation, remain revived and remain reformed. God bless you.